Neither rain nor snow nor dark of night will prevent us from our appointed rounds. So even despite the blizzard or whatever it is, the bomb cyclone.
Neither rain nor snow nor dark of night.
That's right. None of that will prevent us from doing SDL in the studio. I'm at the big desk today. So we are going to talk about SQL injection at the request of some viewers. So we hope you'll stick around for that. So hang on and we'll be right back. Hi, Andy.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So Top can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man, and
oof. In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. It'd be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like,
oh,
hey, Dave.
It's like Sims, but with, you know,
it would be like Sims.
Instead of AI, it's only.
Roger Williams University is a premier destination for cybersecurity, offering in-person and online classes designed and taught in collaboration with industry experts. Using virtual environments that simulate real-world systems, you'll solve complex cyber issues and analyze cyber threats to prepare you for in-demand jobs in this rapidly growing field. Whether you're just starting out or want to advance in the cyber profession, RWU offers degrees and coursework at all levels. Learn more at rwu.edu/cyber. Hey, so next week I will be at InfoSec World. So you should tune in. We're going to shoot the show in Disney World in Orlando. The whole Pulse Security Weekly crew is going to be there. So if you are going to be at InfoSec World in Disney next week, be sure and come by the booth. I'm going to be doing Hacker Movie Trivia. Try to con Paul into buying you a drink or something, if it's legal. So be careful. Also coming up, B-Sides Orlando Shootout at Full Sail Live on 7 April. You really need to get to that. B-Sides are always great, and they're cheap. Check it out at bsidesorlando2018.eventbrite.com and bsidesorlando.org. Students, it's free. So you can't get any cheaper than that. They got labs, they got speakers, they got challenges, they got all kinds of cool stuff. So what's not to like? RSA. I imagine that. Sometimes I wonder about those guys since they're inviting me. I will be speaking at RSA 2018 in San Francisco on the 18th of April at 8 o'clock in the morning. Thanks, guys. But be sure and come by if you are going to be at RSA. We're going to do some shooting there with NetSparker and Distill and some people like that. So be sure and tune into the show that week or come by if you're at the RSA booth. And I'm probably going to shoot the show at the NetSparker booth if they will let me. We'll see what they let me do and what they don't do. But be sure and come by and check that out at the Marriott Marquis in sunny, well, not so sunny, San Francisco. But so you asked for SQL injection, so we're going to talk about it. And I've got the amazing Russ joining me. His hot dogs bring all the boys to the yard. Hi, Russ.
Hey, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a snowy day in Rhode Island, so you look like you're somewhere sunny and warm. But
I'm in a kitchen with snow on the windows.
It looks sunny and warm, and even if it's not, it looks that way. But cool. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, we're going to talk about SQL injections. This is one of the more ubiquitous kind of things that people hear about all the time. For a long time, this was an incredible threat to people's websites in particular, but it's also a threat to databases. Based on a problem, and we're going to explain what that problem is so that you understand it better and give you some suggestions for maybe how to deal with it if you have never dealt with it at all. So the first part of this is, what is SQL? So SQL is an acronym for Structured Query Language, and it's been around forever. It's a scripting language that is basically used to manage relational databases and particularly SQL databases. So, get it. Most relational databases in the last 20 years use this language to write queries, create tables. Basically, this is how the whole database gets manipulated. Even if you're using some kind of GUI to manipulate your database, in reality, what you're doing is you're using the GUI to generate SQL commands that maybe you don't even see, or you can, of course, go to the command line and generate them yourself. And so most old-time database people knew how to write SQL in like the actual scripting language, but a lot of modern people have used some kind of an interface to deal with that. And Russ, do you do SQL?
Yeah, I do actually. I use I prefer the GUIs. Like I use Access as a front end to a SQL back end, or I also use, if I'm creating large amounts of select statements, I'm using FlySpeed. So I do a lot of those for various reasons.
So originally, you know, a database was just sort of back-end tool, and when I first started dealing with databases, I was writing queries that were SQL statements that were embedded inside of Fortran or in C. So you were actually embedding strings of SQL and issuing those to a linked-up database. Well, relational databases, which are the most common kind that we see today in the modern age, are the back end of just about everything, whether it's a website or it's an actual like a product, or it is an end user tool or whatever it is. So if you go to the hospital and they're pulling up your records, those are being stored in a relational database. And a relational database, you want to tell us what a relational database is, Russ? Is that your thing?
Yeah, a relational database is a database where you can formulate relationships between tables. So for instance, the DMV is one of those types of databases where it houses, you know, a record, and a record is one complete set of information. So a record in the DMV would be primarily your driver's license number, your first name, your last name, your address, and so on and so forth. And the relational part of that database is formulated by that particular table being related to another table by your probably driver's license number. And that another table which that relationship might formulate is, like, let's say, speeding tickets or violations, moving violations or non-moving violations. So I think that relational aspect of it is really where you're taking multiple facets of a database in the form of tables and then relating them by a single key or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, each table in a relational database is supposed to, and there's actually a process for this called normalization. So if the most famous relational database book is called the date book, and the white date book is like everybody used to have that. But the idea of a normalized relational database is that each table has one theme. So if that theme is addresses, the table may actually not be an entire table. It may be made up of lots of pieces of different thematic tables that are joined with key tables. So a key table has got actually keys inserted into it. So if the key is your driver's license number, that key record may be used to link your name to your violations to all these other pieces of information. And when you link all that stuff together, it means that the database itself is a kind of a threat vector, because what happens is the fact that you can reach across all those tables means that you can join them. And by doing that, you can retrieve information. Now, in a secure system, what happens is those tables have limitations placed on them around security capability. So that means that maybe I can access my record, but I can't access Russ's record. So that's one kind of security limitation. It also can mean that I may be able to access certain parts of that database without being able to see all of it, because I may not be able to join another table to my table unless I have permissions to do so, if it is set up correctly. And relational databases rely heavily on these types of key tables and these types of joins to allow people to gather a huge amount of information. So when you use a website, a lot of times even the web pages themselves are being stored. The links to the web pages are being stored. All that stuff's going to be in some kind of database table. Did I say that okay, Russ?
Yeah, I think that's great. One thing I just want to mention too is when you talk about key tables, those tables hold or house things called primary keys, and those primary keys or fields are unique sets of information that are unique to that particular table. So, for instance, driver's license number table or driver's license table houses a driver's license number, which is a unique number that no two people can have. Otherwise, you'd be able to share, speeding tickets or whatever. So when you talk about key tables, I like what you said, Doug, about joining the individual pieces of information into an overarching sort of structure, which is what these select statements and then display or joins can do. So.
And I mean, and that's what queries really do in the sense of joining tables together. So by querying something, inserting keys, taking foreign keys and putting them in a key table, I can literally link 1, 2, 5, 100 tables together to create a record that's going to output the information that I want. So if I really am like at some place and I could join your driver's license number to your name, to your medical records, to your tax records, and all that, I could create this massive join if all those systems cooperated and pull that together. So the idea then of SQL injection is, what if I could use logic to outmaneuver whatever limited security or maybe great security that your SQL database actually has? And so people started manipulating this. So if, for example, I had a table that had usernames, and it had a user ID, and it had a password. So I may have 3 different tables there that have information in them. So there may be a table about Doug, where Doug's home address and my social security number are being stored by one group of people. I may have another table where my login information is being stored. And so that may link to the table that has my password in it.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's how a lot of websites do authentication. So they go look this up. So if I'm a bad guy and I wanted to try to penetrate a website, one of the things I might want to do is to be able to log in as Doug. So let's just say that for a second, I decide that I'm going to log in as Doug because I feel like Doug has got something pretty valuable. When Doug logs in, he goes to the username field and types Doug, and he goes to the password field and types Mr. Fufu or whatever his password is. And okay, what happens in that process then is the software queries the table. It tries to see, does the password field in the table, which contains Mr. Fufu, match what I typed in the field on the web screen? So that's stored in a variable, and it's compared to the database table result. If the results match, and what I typed is the same thing as what is in the table, then that logic query returns true. So it actually is like a function, and it returns true as its value. Okay, cool. So that's the way it's supposed to work. What some people started finding out was that there are ways to start manipulating and causing problems for these types of systems. So one of the first SQL injection attacks I ever saw or read about or heard of, and I went and tried it immediately, and guess what? It worked. This was quite a while ago. In that type of attack, what was done was, instead of typing a password in the password box, what if I just did something like 1 equals 1? Now, 1 equals 1 is a logic statement, and 1 does indeed equal 1. And if the system is flawed, guess what value it returns when I type 1 equals 1 in the password field? It says, for Doug,
true.
It returns true. And guess what? That lets you go right past the password login. So it validated you, and I was logged into the system as Doug. So now all I needed to do to violate that system just horrifically was actually to have a login name that was in the table.
And I just posted an example of that, Doug, in the Facebook live stream chat from W3 Schools, which has a nice example, and it's a select user ID, name, password from users where user ID equals 105 or 101 or 1 equals 1. It's exactly what you said to demonstrate.
Right. And so by jamming that little OR option in there, what you've done is you've created a logic. So you've out-logicked the logic, because in an OR, if either side of it is true, it returns true. And if either side is false, then it returns false. But in that OR statement, you just said password OR 1 equals 1.
Yep.
And you just got logged in as me. Now, that may not get you much, but it also may get you a whole lot. So in things like identity theft or something like that, or with a little bit of social engineering, and we all love social engineering, because if I call you on the phone and I say, hello, this is Paul down in IT, and we have a bit of a problem in our system, and I've used this approach before in social engineering attacks. you know, this is Paul down in IT, and we have a little bit of a problem. There's a hacker in our system. We think they're using your account, and we need to validate that you are who you say you are. I don't need any particular information from you, because you just give me your username. And a lot of people will give you their username. And if I'm calling the right people, like maybe I call the head of IT, or I call the vice president of database operations, or I call the vice president of finance, or somebody like that, and I get their login, wow. And imagine if you could do that at a hospital, and you could get a doctor who may be a great surgeon, but maybe he's not the best when dealing with like web-based threats. And I get that doctor to give me their username, and it's Dr. Fufu, and I go log in as Dr. Fufu, and all of a sudden I have access to a lot of patient records. And now I can just write queries completely legitimately at the command line and say select star from patients, and all of a sudden I get back a list of every patient in the hospital. If I have every patient's name and key, guess what I can do next? I can create a join. I can join that to their records, to their social security numbers, to their everything. And all of a sudden, I have extracted, or exfolated is a term they use a lot. I've exfolated all that data onto my system, and I log out, and I'm gone forever. Right? You agree, Russ?
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And to also be clear and not downplay just how serious this is, it's not with just SQL. You can use other interfaces like, you know, ASP or PHP to do these types of squirrely or SQLi attacks, if you like. So it's not just SQL.
Well, yeah, and we were just
database.
I just finished recording an interview with Rami Assad, who is an expert on like bots and anti-bot activities. And today, of course, if you can write bots that can go out and generate these kind of attacks, you can actually examine many systems quickly because the bots are doing it for you. If I can get in with this username, I can even do stuff like drop table. And drop table is an SQL command that deletes the table. So what if I type drop table employees on the VP of Finance's system, and it actually, he has permission level to actually delete that table. And all of a sudden, we're at the point where we go, I hope our backups are in pretty good shape because we just lost a table with 100,000 customers in it or something like that, or 100,000 employee records, and they're all gone. That's pretty bad. It's not as bad as when they exfoliate all that information, and we've seen that with all these kind of attacks and things where people are exfoliating customer information. A second attack I came up with in a web-based type attack, basically this same OR logic bomb on a web page may let you escalate beyond your privileges. So an example of this, and it doesn't work there, I actually went and checked last night, on Southwest Airlines, what if I was pulling up flight information for me, and in the field where it asked me to put in my record locator, so if you fly, you know that's like a 6-digit code that is a key. Guess what? That's a key that's used to refer to all records that have been issued. So all the passengers that have flights are now linked. So if you go to Southwest Airlines, there's going to be a table that's got my records in it. There's going to be a table that's got flights in it. And I'm going to join those two things together with that key. So that record locator number, if I went on that search and instead of putting in my record locator, I put OR 1 equals 1, once again, that true gets pushed in there. And now instead of just querying for my record locator, it may well query for all record locators. And if I do that and I suddenly get from Southwest Airlines a list on my web screen of every flight and every customer and all their information, including their frequent flyer numbers and maybe their passport numbers, who knows what all else information you've given to the airline just so you can get on a plane. Imagine how powerful that's going to be. And that's a type of exfoliation that is incredibly dangerous because, and so many websites got compromised like this over and over and over again because they did not know it was even happening because there's no record of that happening. You agree?
I agree 100%, Doug. And I also, you know, to be clear, there are programs that can be downloaded for free, which will run and check against various websites and online databases to test them for these types of vulnerabilities, and then they'll even go so far as to test individual fields. So for an improperly coded website, you know, these types of programs or scripts can run and test for vulnerabilities. So you open yourself wide up, you know, if you're not careful.
And my last attack was, what if instead of exfolating information, I actually push something onto you? So I actually inject something into your system. And the same thing can be done. So, for instance, an SQL command like insert into users. I could literally push a user and a password onto your system. And if I understand the table structures, which maybe I got by just simply dumping them on the screen with another SQL command, I could literally push a user that has escalated privileges into your system. And if the system is validating users with that, I could literally log in legitimately. I could go right back and log in at the Bank of Hoo-Ha and log in as Dr. Fufu, and I'm suddenly in there as a root admin user in the bank. And that's a pretty scary thing to kind of do. So you can certainly see permissions getting pushed. You can see usernames getting pushed, and you could push other information in there. I saw an SQL injection attack with a client one time where the person was pushing, it was very clever, they were pushing negative numbers into a billing system. And what it caused to happen was every month when they generated bills, that person actually got a check. The software evaluated the value of a field in a table, and if the number was negative, it meant they owed you money. So instead of it generating a bill for this person, it generated a check. And there were all these people and their friends that were getting checks mailed to them every month from this company. And the reason it was all automated. So the reason it was happening was because they had done an SQL injection and pushed this in there. So what do you do about it? I mean, so there's a lot of other ways you can manipulate these types of attacks as well. Well, the first thing is, as Russ said, you need to be sure you've run vulnerability scans against your systems to make sure that your databases aren't subject to these kind of weaknesses. If you haven't scanned your databases with tools that specifically assess SQL injection vulnerabilities, you may well be sitting on an old unpatched SQL database or a website that is not filtering these things. And if that happens to you, people may well be doing this to you, and you won't know they're doing it, because unless you're logging very low level, I mean very low level, you're going to miss these things in your logs because it's just a query. It was just run. Nothing dramatic happened, and they just exfolated all your customer data like that. Yeah?
Yep. And also, Doug, you know, on Code Curmudgeon's website, he talks about some of the most infamous SQL injection hacks of all time. And you know, companies like WordPress and GoDaddy and Equifax, as we know, and, you know, all the way down to, you know, Moodle and, you know, all those types of companies, they're not immune to this.
Absolutely.
And, you know, this is something really serious, and it can literally result in data leaking for many, well, in the Equifax's case, 145 million people plus.
I mean, yeah, when you start losing data at that level and you start having your customers getting compromised and your customers getting attacked, all of a sudden this is a very huge liability from a financial perspective as well. You can also use firewalls. Certain types of application level firewalls can prevent or at least identify these kind of things when people are coming in. Now, if you're doing this on a website and all your traffic's coming in on port 80 and port whatever, port 443 and so forth, you probably aren't going to detect that because it's coming right through your firewall. You've got an open port. But if you have an application level firewall, it may be able to identify these signatures in the files. It may be able to see SQL injection type attacks. It may be able to look. I used to have one that just looked for the string 1 equals 1. And if you saw 1 equals 1, you knew people were at least trying this. IDS, IPS type systems can also detect these packets and often look for those types of signatures as well, and you can at least blacklist those attackers. Now, yeah, they can change their IP addresses, but the more steps you put in front of them, the more difficult it becomes for them to attack you. So this is sort of the pit bull in the back seat of your car. You know, if you're walking down the street in Manhattan and you see 3 nice Maseratis sitting there and you're going to steal one of them, the one that's got, you know, the keys in the ignition is probably the one you're going to steal. The one with a pit bull in the back seat, yeah, maybe you pass. I mean, I know pit bulls aren't that dangerous really, but, you know, I'd rather steal the one with the keys in the ignition. A lot of advanced firewalls, a lot of advanced IPS stuff at this point in history can look for these types of attacks, but your best defense is to patch up. So your product probably has patches for it, and if you haven't tested it and patched, then you're very likely vulnerable to this. Russ?
Absolutely, and to, you know, also add that you can even do it when you're just constructing these databases, you know, on the programming level. Like, for instance, you know, when you have a field verify, if you put a field verification in there, you know, when you're constructing individual fields, just remove the ability to enter equal signs. If that's not the only thing, but a smart coder would be able to do that when they're constructing this.
And field restrictions are always a good idea. I mean, don't ever let anybody tell you that. I mean, people don't do it, coders don't do it, but there's no reason somebody should be typing that. Now, in the modern age, in the password field, we may allow the equal sign because we want to allow symbols and other character sets, and so all of a sudden it's harder to restrict that, but maybe you shouldn't allow equal signs in a password and just put a note up that says you can't put an equal sign in a password. Have a nice day. Use some other weird symbol. Sorry. And you see things like that. But yeah, good coding, secure coding always means sitting down and evaluating what inputs are allowed. And any good piece of software that you write or anybody else writes should actually evaluate user inputs. And you can certainly put right into your code, I'm looking for these type of attacks. But be sure you're patched. Be sure you have good code. And like I say, run vulnerability scanners against your network so that you can detect if you have these kind of weaknesses, so at least you're aware of them and you can start trying to figure out how to mitigate that risk. We will eventually, when I'm at RSA, I'm going to actually talk about vulnerability scanners in particular and NetSparker and some other things like that. Next week, a visit to a con, so the InfoSec World Con in Florida will be there. The whole Security Weekly team is going to be there, so we've got a booth, we've got interviews, we've got all kinds of fun and games. So you should definitely come by, get a shirt, get a sticker, whatever you want to do. Russ, what else you got for us? Anything?
No, I think that's it. I'll be attending remotely next week, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yay! Well, so enjoy the snowy day if you're involved in the snowy day, and if you're not, enjoy that too. We hope to see you next week when we're going to be at the con. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon. Bye.